Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. November in Nebraska can be unpredictable, but nobody expected what hit us that Tuesday before Thanksgiving. My brother Nathan called me around noon from his job at the hardware store. Said they were selling generators like hotcakes because the weather service was predicting something nasty. I remember laughing it off. Told him people always panic over nothing. My wife Diane was already at the grocery store with our daughter Megan, who'd just turned 16 that October, grabbing last-minute ingredients for the holiday meal we were hosting. My parents were driving up from Kansas City the next day, and Diane's sister was bringing her kids from Omaha. We had the biggest house in the family, a 2-story colonial we'd bought after I made partner at the accounting firm, so holiday hosting duties usually fell to us. By 4 that afternoon, the temperature had dropped 40 degrees in 2 hours, and the rain that had been falling all morning turned into something between sleet and freezing rain that coated everything it touched. I left the office early when I saw co-workers scraping inch-thick ice off their windshields in the parking lot. The drive home usually took 20 minutes, but that day, it took me almost 2 hours, crawling along at 10 miles per hour, watching cars slide into ditches left and right. When I finally pulled into our garage, the power was already flickering, and Diane met me at the door with that worried look she gets when she's been watching too much local news. She said the weather guy was calling it a once-in-a-decade ice storm, and sure enough, just as I was hanging up my coat, everything went dark. We had candles and flashlights ready since power outages weren't uncommon in our neighborhood, but this was different. You could hear the ice accumulating on the trees outside, these sharp cracking sounds every few minutes as branches gave way under the weight. Megan was in the living room, wrapped in a blanket, complaining that her phone was at 12% battery and asking why we didn't have one of those whole house backup batteries like her friend Ashley's family. Nathan showed up around 7, just walked right in without knocking like he always did, carrying this red portable generator he'd snagged from the store. Said it was the last one on the shelf, some brand I'd never heard of, but it would keep our furnace running and maybe a few lights. He'd brought extra gas cans too, 4 of them, which he lined up against the garage wall like soldiers. The temperature inside the house was already dropping fast, maybe 60 degrees and falling, and you could see your breath in the hallway. Diane had pulled out every blanket we owned and made a nest in the family room where we all huddled together, eating cold sandwiches and trying to make the best of it. Nathan spent about an hour reading the generator manual by flashlight, then headed out to the garage to set it up. I helped him position it near the garage door, which we cracked open about 6 inches for ventilation, just like the manual said. The thing roared to life on the 3rd pull, sounding like a lawnmower on steroids, and within minutes, we had the furnace humming again and a few lights on in the main rooms. We all cheered like we'd just won the lottery, and Diane actually cried a little from relief. Round 9, Nathan decided to head home before the roads got any worse, though I tried to convince him to stay. His apartment was only 10 minutes away, but in these conditions, that meant almost an hour of white-knuckle driving. After he left, we settled in for the night, grateful for the warmth spreading through the house. Megan went up to her room first, said she had homework to finish before the break, though I knew she just wanted to charge her phone and text her boyfriend while she had power. Diane and I stayed up until maybe 11, playing cards by lamplight and listening to the ice storm rage outside. Every now and then, I'd go check on the generator through the door to the garage, making sure it had enough gas, and each time that steady rumble reassured me we'd make it through the night just fine. I woke up around 2 in the morning with the strangest headache, like someone had wrapped a belt around my skull and was slowly tightening it. My mouth was completely dry, and when I sat up, the room tilted slightly, not quite spinning, but definitely unstable. I figured I was dehydrated from the dry furnace air and stumbled to the bathroom for water and ibuprofen. Diane was sleeping hard beside me, snoring louder than usual. which was odd because she rarely snored unless she was sick. On my way back to bed, I noticed our bedroom door was closed, which we never did because Diane liked the air circulation. Must have shut it without thinking, I told myself, though something nagged at me about that. The headache faded after a few minutes, and I drifted back to sleep, thinking about all the cooking we'd have to do tomorrow if the power came back. The next time I opened my eyes, pale gray light was filtering through the bedroom curtains, and my phone showed 7:43. The headache was back, worse than before, pounding behind my eyeballs like a drumbeat. Diane was already up, probably downstairs making coffee on the camp stove we kept for emergencies. I pulled on yesterday's clothes and headed for Megan's room to wake her up, since she could sleep through anything. Her door was closed too, and when I knocked, there was no response. Not unusual for a teenager who stayed up late, so I knocked harder, then finally just opened the door. She was still in bed, buried under 3 blankets, completely still. I called her name, walked over to shake her shoulder, and that's when I realized she wasn't just sleeping deeply. My mind went blank for a second, then exploded into action. Her skin had this grayish tint, and when I pulled back the blankets, she was completely limp. I screamed for Diane while checking for a pulse, found one, but it was weak and way too fast. Diane came running up the stairs, took one look, and immediately called 911 while I started CPR, the way I'd learned it years ago for a workplace safety course. The dispatcher kept asking questions Diane couldn't answer. What happened? Any medications? Any injuries? And all we could say was that she wouldn't wake up. The paramedics took 12 minutes to arrive, 12 minutes that felt like hours, with me doing chest compressions until my arms burned and Diane sobbing beside me. They pushed me aside, started working on her with practiced efficiency, got her on oxygen, started an IV, loaded her onto a gurney. One of the paramedics, a young woman with a tight ponytail, kept asking us questions while her partner worked on Megan. Any drugs in the house, had she been drinking? Any history of seizures, and then she asked about heating, if we had any space heaters running or a fireplace going. I told her about the generator in the garage, and her face changed immediately. She grabbed her radio, said something about possible CO poisoning, then told her partner they needed to move now. She turned to us and said we needed to get out of the house immediately and wait outside for the fire department. Diane was already following the gurney, but the paramedic grabbed my arm, looked me straight in the eye, and asked if anyone else was in the house. When I said no, she asked about the generator again, where exactly it was, how long it had been running. I explained about the garage, the door cracked open for ventilation, running since about 8 the previous night. The fire department arrived just as the ambulance was pulling away with Diane and Megan inside. I wanted to follow them to the hospital, but the captain, a massive guy named Brennan according to his helmet, wouldn't let me drive. He had one of his crew checking me with some kind of meter while he asked more questions about the generator setup. The meter started beeping, and the firefighter showed it to Brennan, who immediately had me sit down on the bumper of the truck and put an oxygen mask on my face. He explained that I had elevated carbon monoxide levels in my blood, not critical, but enough that I shouldn't be driving. They went into my house with some equipment, came back out 10 minutes later shaking their heads. Brennan sat down next to me, pulled out a notebook and started explaining how carbon monoxide works, how it builds up in enclosed spaces, how that 6-inch gap we left wasn't nearly enough ventilation for a generator that size. He told me the readings in the house were still over 400 parts per million near the garage door, and probably much higher overnight when the generator was running full blast to keep the furnace going. The gas had seeped through the vents, the walls, even tiny gaps under doors, filling the house slowly while we slept. Megan's room was right above the garage, which is why she got the worst of it. He said we were lucky to be alive, that whole families have died from exactly this same mistake. The oxygen started clearing my head, and with that clarity came a crushing weight in my chest that had nothing to do with carbon monoxide. I kept thinking about Nathan bringing that generator, how proud we were when it started up, how we thought we were being so careful. Brennan must have seen it on my face because he put his hand on my shoulder. told me it happens more than people think, that generators kill more people during power outages than the actual storms do. A neighbor, George, from 2 houses down, drove me to the hospital while the fire department aired out our house. In the emergency room, they had me on high-flow oxygen for 3 hours while running blood tests every 30 minutes. Diane was in another room getting the same treatment, but Megan was in the ICU on something called hyperbaric oxygen therapy. The doctor, a tired-looking woman who couldn't have been much older than Nathan, explained that Megan had severe carbon monoxide poisoning, that her levels were near fatal when she arrived. She said the next 24 hours would be critical, that even if Megan recovered, there could be neurological damage, problems with memory, coordination, things that might not show up for weeks. Diane and I took turns sitting with her in the ICU, watching machines breathe for her, holding her hand and talking to her like she could hear us, telling her about the Thanksgiving dinner we'd make when she got better, how her cousins were still coming, how we'd tell this story years from now and be grateful we survived it. Megan woke up on Thanksgiving morning, groggy and confused but awake, asking why she was in the hospital and why her head hurt so bad. The doctors ran test after test, checking her reflexes, her memory, her coordination, and everything came back normal, or close enough to normal that they called it a miracle. She didn't remember anything after going to bed that Tuesday night, just waking up in a hospital room with machines all around her. We spent Thanksgiving in the hospital cafeteria, eating dry turkey and lumpy mashed potatoes that tasted better than any meal I'd ever had because we were all there together, alive. Nathan came by with flowers he'd bought at a gas station, his eyes red from crying, apologizing over and over for bringing the generator. But I told him it wasn't his fault, that we all thought we were being safe. My parents and Diane's sister arrived that afternoon, and we had to explain everything again, watch their faces go from confusion to horror to relief. We were discharged Friday afternoon with strict instructions to install carbon monoxide detectors on every floor of the house, which seems so obvious now that I can't believe we didn't have them before. The power had come back Thursday morning while we were still in the hospital, and neighbors had already moved the generator out of our garage, left it sitting in the driveway like evidence at a crime scene. I sold it the next week to a guy who promised he'd only use it outside, far from any buildings, though part of me wanted to take a sledgehammer to it instead. Megan went back to school after Thanksgiving break, seemed completely fine, but Diane and I watched her constantly those first few weeks, looking for any sign of the delayed problems the doctor had warned us about. They never came, thank God, but even now, 2 years later, whenever there's a storm warning, whenever the power flickers, Diane and I look at each other with the same thought, remembering how close we came to losing everything because we thought 6 inches was enough. I run an IT consulting firm from my home office in Colorado Springs, and that November afternoon, I was deep in server migration planning when my phone rang. An unknown number, but potential clients often called from numbers I didn't recognize, especially now that business was picking up after 2 lean years. A woman with a flat professional voice asked if she could speak with Brandon Novak about an outstanding debt. Wrong number, I told her, but she insisted this was the number on file, then asked if I could just verify the address they had. Red flags everywhere. I hung up, blocked the number, and got back to my spreadsheets. 20 minutes later, another unknown number, different area code. Same script about debt collection and needing to confirm my address. By the time I went to bed that night, I'd received 14 calls from different numbers, all following the same pattern. Some were recorded messages, others had real people who knew my full name, middle initial included, and kept pushing for address confirmation. My wife Amy thought maybe someone with a similar name had given out a wrong number by mistake. We'd only been in this house for 18 months, having moved here after I left my corporate job to go solo with the consulting business. Our neighbors were mostly retired couples who kept to themselves, and we hadn't had any issues before this. put my phone on silent and figured whoever they were looking for would eventually sort things out with the actual collection agency. Around 6 the next morning, I woke up to pounding on my front door, the kind that makes your heart jump before your brain catches up. Through the peephole, I saw 2 police officers standing on my porch, their breath visible in the cold morning air. When I opened the door, still in my pajama pants and old conference t-shirt from a tech summit, the younger officer asked if I was Brandon Novak. After I confirmed, he explained they'd received a 911 call about 40 minutes earlier from someone claiming to be me, saying I was having thoughts of self-harm and had access to firearms. The caller had provided my full name, this exact address, even my cell phone number. I stood there trying to process what he was saying while Amy appeared behind me, wrapping her robe tighter against the morning chill. The officers needed to come in, they said, just to verify everyone was safe, standard protocol for welfare checks. We spent the next 20 minutes convincing them that neither of us had made that call, that I didn't own any guns, and that I was perfectly fine mentally, just confused and increasingly concerned. The older officer, a sergeant with gray temples, took notes while I explained about the debt collection calls from the previous day. He nodded like he'd heard similar stories before, mentioned something about swatting and doxing becoming more common, though this seemed mild compared to some cases. They gave me a case number, suggested I file a report about the harassment, and left just as my neighbors were starting their morning routines, several of them watching from their driveways. Amy made coffee while I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my phone, and wondering who would go through this much trouble to mess with me. I couldn't focus on work that day, jumping every time my phone buzzed even though the calls had stopped completely after the police visit. Amy worked from the living room instead of her usual spot at the downtown law firm, said she didn't feel comfortable leaving me alone after what happened. We installed a Ring doorbell that afternoon, one of those video ones that sends alerts to your phone, and I spent way too much time checking the app every time a car drove past. The rest of the day passed without incident, just the 2 of us pretending to work while really just waiting for something else to happen. Around 9 that night, after we'd both given up any pretense of productivity and settled in to watch some mindless TV, I got a notification from the Ring app. Motion detected at your front door. The video feed showed our porch, dimly lit by the motion sensor light we'd installed last year. Nobody was there, but something had triggered it. I scrolled back through the recording and saw it, just for a second. A figure walking up to our door and placing something on the mat before quickly backing away, staying just out of range of the clear camera view. All I could make out was a dark jacket and what might have been a baseball cap. Amy was already calling the police while I stood at the window, trying to see if anyone was still out there. The street looked empty, just parked cars and the glow from porch lights. After 5 minutes of watching and waiting, I carefully opened the door, staying behind it like it was a shield, and looked down at the mat. There was a manila envelope, no writing on the outside, sealed with regular tape. I brought it inside using a pair of kitchen tongs, which felt ridiculous but also necessary somehow. Amy told me not to open it until the police arrived, but we both knew they wouldn't come quickly for a non-emergency envelope delivery. I held it up to the light, could see papers inside, what looked like printed documents. After debating for another minute, I put on latex gloves from Amy's cleaning supplies and carefully opened one end with scissors. Inside were about a dozen pages, printouts from various websites. The first was a screenshot of my LinkedIn profile, but edited, with my job history changed to include positions at companies I'd never worked for, including one that had been investigated for fraud 2 years ago. The next page was from a dating site I'd never heard of, with my photo and name but claiming I was divorced and looking for discreet encounters. Page after page of fabricated profiles, all using my real information mixed with lies, posted on job sites, forums, even a registry for sex offenders with my name and address, though thankfully that one was just a mock-up, not actually posted. The last page made my chest tighten in a way the others hadn't. It was a printed photo of our house taken during the day, probably with a phone camera from across the street. But someone had edited it, drawn red arrows pointing to different windows with labels like home office, master bedroom, and bathroom. In the corner, someone had written in pen, not printed but actually handwritten, "Nice setup, Brandon. We should talk about your consulting rates." Amy grabbed the pages from me when she saw my face change, and I watched her expression shift from concern to genuine fear as she flipped through them. She immediately started taking photos of each page with her phone, her lawyer instincts kicking in, documenting everything while muttering about harassment charges and restraining orders. We didn't sleep much that night, even with a patrol car doing periodic drive-bys as promised. Every sound outside had us checking the Ring app. Every car that slowed down made us peek through the blinds. Around 3 in the morning, Amy finally crashed on the couch while I sat in the kitchen with my laptop, searching for any of these fake profiles online. I found 2 of them still active, the dating site one and a forum post where I was offering discount IT services for cash only, no contracts needed. I took screenshots and started the process of reporting them, but most sites wanted extensive verification to remove content, and I knew it would take days or weeks. The worst part was not knowing why this was happening or who was behind it. I'd been through my client list 3 times, looking for anyone who might have a grudge, any project that had gone badly, but came up empty. Friday morning came too fast, and neither of us went to work. Amy called her office to say she had a family emergency, and I canceled my 2 video calls, claiming internet issues. We were drinking our 3rd pot of coffee when my phone rang, a local number I didn't recognize. Against Amy's advice, I answered it. A man's voice, rough like he'd been smoking for decades, asked if I was the Brandon offering IT services for cash. When I started to explain that was a fake post, he cut me off, said he didn't care about that but wanted to know if I was the same Brandon who used to work at Systematics Corp back in 2018. My whole body went cold. I had worked there briefly as a contractor for 4 months before the company imploded in a massive embezzlement scandal. I wasn't involved, had actually left 2 weeks before the FBI raids, but anyone connected to that place had their reputation damaged. The man chuckled when I went silent, said we definitely needed to meet, that he had a business proposition that would benefit both of us. I told him I wasn't interested in any proposition, and started to hang up when he said something that stopped me cold. He mentioned Amy's maiden name, the law firm where she worked, even the floor number of her office. Said it would be a shame if her colleagues found out about her husband's connection to Systematics, especially the encrypted files I'd supposedly helped hide before leaving. That was complete fiction. I'd never touched anything related to their financial systems, but he said he had documents that suggested otherwise. The call ended with him saying I had until midnight to reconsider, and that he'd be reaching out with instructions. Amy heard enough from my side to understand what was happening. This wasn't random harassment anymore. This was extortion, and whoever this was had done serious homework on both of us. That evening, while Amy was on the phone with a colleague who specialized in cybercrime, I noticed something on the Ring app that I'd missed before. Going back through the saved footage from the past few days, I saw the same car, a dark blue sedan with mud covering the license plate, had driven past our house at least 15 times since Wednesday. Always slowing down near our driveway, never stopping, just crawling past like they were checking something. I started downloading all the footage when the doorbell triggered again. This time the camera caught him clearly, a heavy-set man in his 50s with a gray beard and wire-rimmed glasses, wearing a Broncos cap and a brown leather jacket. He stood there for maybe 10 seconds looking directly at the camera with this slight smile, then held up a piece of paper with 11:47 p.m. written on it before walking away. Amy called the police immediately while I checked every door and window lock in the house. The responding officer, different from the morning crew, took one look at the video and called for backup. Within 20 minutes, we had 3 patrol cars on our street and a detective named Rivera sitting at our kitchen table, going through everything from the beginning. She recognized the description of the man from the video, said his name was Carl Brennan, a former private investigator, who'd lost his license 5 years ago for illegally accessing personal records and selling them. He'd been connected to 3 other extortion cases but never convicted, always managing to stay just within the gray areas of the law. Rivera said he usually worked with someone else, a tech guy who handled the digital harassment while Carl did the physical intimidation. At 11:47 p.m. exactly, my phone buzzed with a text from a blocked number. Just an address, a warehouse district on the south side of the city, and the words, "Come alone or the files go public Monday." Rivera was already shaking her head before I finished reading it out loud. They'd set up surveillance on our house and would follow if Carl or anyone else showed up, but she strongly advised against going to that address. Amy was more direct, said I'd be an idiot to walk into what was obviously a trap, but Carl had done his homework too well. He knew about systematics, knew that even false allegations with fabricated evidence could destroy my business, especially in the small world of IT consulting, where reputation was everything. Rivera left 2 officers parked outside and gave us her direct number, said they'd be increasing patrols all night, and that a cyber crimes unit was already working on tracking the phone numbers and fake profiles. I didn't go to the warehouse. Instead, I did what I should have done from the beginning, used my actual IT skills to fight back. While Carl was waiting at whatever trap he'd set, I was working with an old colleague from my corporate days who specialized in digital forensics. We traced the fake profiles back to a specific IP address, found the digital fingerprints Carl's tech partner had left behind. By 4 a.m. Saturday morning, we had enough evidence that Rivera could get a warrant. Turns out Carl's partner was a guy named Dennis Huang, who ran a computer repair shop that was barely staying afloat. The police raided both the shop and Carl's apartment Saturday afternoon, found everything: the software they used for the robocalls, the templates for fake documents, even recordings of Carl bragging about previous extortion schemes he'd pulled on other former Systematics employees. The whole thing unraveled faster than I expected. Dennis flipped immediately, gave up everything about Carl's operation in exchange for a plea deal. They'd been running this scheme for 2 years, targeting anyone connected to corporate scandals, betting that most people would pay rather than risk their reputations. 7 other victims came forward once the arrests made the news. Carl got 8 years, Dennis got 3 with probation. The fake profiles took weeks to fully clean up, and I still occasionally get calls from lawyers offering to help with my debt situation, but my business survived. Amy and I moved 6 months later, not because we had to, but because we wanted to. The new house has better security, no basement access points, and neighbors who actually talk to each other. I still check the Ring app more than I should, and unknown numbers go straight to voicemail, but at least now when I see a car slow down near my driveway, it's usually just someone checking their GPS or looking for a house number, not someone documenting my life for their next extortion attempt. November always meant double shifts at Garrison's department store, and when Colleen asked if anyone could cover overnight inventory that Friday after Thanksgiving, I needed the extra cash too badly to say no. 26, and still paying off student loans from a journalism degree I never used. I spent most nights stocking shelves and folding endless racks of winter coats that customers would destroy again by morning. That particular Friday, the store had closed at midnight after the Black Friday chaos, and I arrived at 1 in the morning with my thermos of coffee and a podcast downloaded on my phone, thinking it would be just another boring shift counting merchandise in the stockroom, while the mall sat dark and empty around us. Garrison's had this eerie quality after closing that I'd gotten used to over the past 8 months of working there, but that night hit different from the moment I badged in through the employee entrance. Usually there'd be at least 3 or 4 people for overnight inventory, but Colleen had texted that she'd gotten food poisoning from her mom's turkey stuffing, and Brad's car had broken down on the highway coming back from his parents' place in Michigan. Just me and Hector from maintenance, she'd said, and he'd already started his rounds on the opposite end of the mall. I walked through the back corridors toward our department, passing the break room where someone had left half a pumpkin pie in the fridge with a post-it note saying "free," and the familiar music played through the overhead speakers at that barely audible volume they always forgot to turn completely off. My department was women's formal wear, right in the center of the second floor, surrounded by those tall mannequins wearing sequined holiday dresses and velvet blazers that cost more than my rent. The overnight inventory list showed I needed to count everything in storage sections D through H, which meant about 4 hours of scanning barcodes and checking them against the spreadsheet on the tablet they'd given me. I started with the back corridor where we kept the overstock, boxes stacked to the ceiling with next season's spring collection, already waiting to replace all the winter merchandise. The fluorescent lights hummed that specific frequency that gave me headaches if I stayed back there too long, and I could hear the ventilation system cycling on and off, making the plastic inventory tags flutter against the boxes like tiny fingers tapping for attention. Around 2:30 in the morning, after I'd gotten through sections D and E, I decided to grab water from the vending machine near the customer service desk on the main floor. I walked out onto the sales floor, and that's when I noticed the mannequins for the first time that night. Really noticed them. We had about 40 of them in our department. These faceless white figures with their heads tilted at specific angles that corporate had mandated in some visual merchandising guide, all positioned to draw customers' eyes toward the featured collections. But standing there in the semi-darkness with only the emergency lighting and that faint music still playing, they looked like a crowd of people frozen mid-conversation, their blank faces somehow managing to convey expressions despite having no features at all. I grabbed my water quickly and headed back to the stockroom, telling myself I was being ridiculous, that I'd worked plenty of night shifts before without getting spooked by plastic display figures. Section F was taking forever because someone had mislabeled half the boxes during the last shipment, and I had to open each one to verify the contents matched the inventory codes. My phone battery was dying faster than usual, probably from the terrible signal in the stockroom, so I'd turned off my podcast to save power. Without that distraction, every sound seemed amplified in the quiet. The settling of cardboard boxes, the distant clank of pipes in the walls, and that endless music that had switched from instrumental Christmas songs to some generic jazz that sounded like it was recorded underwater. I was crouched between two tall shelving units scanning a box of cashmere scarves when the announcement system crackled to life above me, making me drop the scanner, which clattered against the concrete floor and skittered under the bottom shelf. At first I thought it was just feedback or maybe Hector testing the system, but then I heard the voice and my whole body went rigid because I recognized it immediately. "Attention Garrison shoppers. The time is now 10 o'clock and our store will be closing in 15 minutes. Please bring your final selections to the registers located at the front of each department. We thank you for shopping with us today and look forward to seeing you again soon. Garrisons, where style meets savings." It was the closing announcement, word for word, the same one that played every single night, except this time it was playing at 3 in the morning in a completely empty store. But that wasn't the worst part. Wasn't the thing that made me stand up so fast I knocked over an entire stack of boxes behind me. The voice making the announcement, that cheery professional voice echoing through the empty store, was mine. They'd recorded me doing the announcement 3 months ago when the regular girl, Janet, had quit without notice, and management needed someone with what they called a friendly but authoritative tone to record all the store messages. I'd spent an entire afternoon in the manager's office reading different scripts into a microphone while Keith from corporate fiddled with audio levels on his laptop, making me repeat phrases until my throat was raw. But hearing it now, at 3 in the morning, when I knew for certain that nobody was in the control room where the announcement system was operated, made every muscle in my body tense up. The message repeated again, my own voice bouncing off the walls of the stockroom, and this time I noticed something wrong with it, like the playback speed was just slightly off, making me sound hollow and strange, the way voices sound when you hear them through a long tunnel or from the bottom of a well. I grabbed my phone and called Hector's cell, but it went straight to voicemail, which wasn't unusual since reception was terrible in most parts of the building. My legs felt unsteady as I made my way out of the stockroom, through the swinging doors that led to the sales floor, trying to convince myself there had to be a logical explanation, maybe a computer glitch or someone playing a prank, though I couldn't imagine who would bother with something so elaborate. The announcement had stopped by the time I reached the sales floor, leaving only that quiet muzak and the hum of the escalators that never stopped running even after hours. I headed toward the stairs that led down to the first floor, where the security office was located, thinking I could check the cameras or at least find the overnight security guard, who was supposed to be monitoring everything from his desk. But as I passed through my department, something made me stop dead in my tracks, and I had to blink several times to make sure I was actually seeing what I thought I was seeing. Every single mannequin in the women's formal wear department had been turned around. When I'd walked through earlier to get water, they'd all been facing outward toward the aisles, positioned to display their outfits to anyone walking by, just like always. Now they were facing inward, 40 pale figures creating a circle around the central display platform, where we kept the featured holiday collection, their eyeless faces directed at the empty space in the middle, like they were watching something I couldn't see. The sequined dresses caught the emergency lighting and threw sparkles across the walls that moved slightly with the air circulation, creating the illusion of movement, of breathing, of life where there shouldn't be any. I took a step backward and bumped into something solid, nearly screaming before I realized it was just one of the jewelry display cases, but the sound I made, that sharp intake of breath, seemed to echo in the silence that had suddenly fallen over the store because even the muzak had stopped playing. My phone buzzed in my pocket, making me jump again, and I saw a text from an unknown number that just said, "Check the fitting rooms." I didn't recognize the number, and when I tried to call it back, I got an automated message saying the number was disconnected. The smart thing would have been to leave right then, just walk out through the employee exit and forget about the inventory, forget about the overtime pay, forget about everything except getting as far away from that store as possible. But something, maybe curiosity or maybe just the stubborn refusal to believe that anything genuinely threatening was happening, made me walk toward the fitting rooms at the back of our department. They were these small cubicles with heavy burgundy curtains instead of doors, 6 rooms in a row with a long mirror at the end of the hallway. And as I got closer, I could hear something that made me slow down, then stop completely. It was my voice again, coming from inside one of the rooms, but this time it wasn't the store announcement. This time it was a conversation I'd had with my mother on the phone 2 days ago, word for word, my side only, talking about how I was thinking about going back to school, how I was tired of retail, how I felt like I was wasting my life folding clothes for people who barely looked at me. The curtain of the middle fitting room was moving slightly, like someone had just brushed past it, and I could see a shadow underneath, the unmistakable shape of feet, except they weren't moving at all, just standing there perfectly still, while my recorded voice continued playing from inside. I reached for the curtain with trembling fingers, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat, and yanked it open in one quick motion. The fitting room was empty except for a small digital recorder sitting on the bench, the kind we used for taking inventory notes, playing that private conversation on a loop. But on the mirror, someone had written a message in what looked like dark red lipstick, the expensive kind we sold at the cosmetics counter for $40 a tube, and the words made my knees weak. "You looked better in the blue dress." Thursday, November 14th, 2:47 p.m. That was 2 weeks ago. A random afternoon when I'd tried on a dress from the clearance rack during my lunch break, alone in these same fitting rooms, or at least I'd thought I was alone. I grabbed the recorder and ran, not caring any more about logic or explanations or anything, except getting out of that store. As I sprinted through the departments, past the mannequins that seemed to turn their heads to track my movement, though I knew that was impossible, the announcement system crackled back to life. But this time it wasn't my voice. It was dozens of voices, all mine but from different recordings, different conversations, different phone calls, all spliced together into an incomprehensible cacophony of my own words, rearranged into new sentences that made no sense but somehow felt threatening, like someone had been collecting pieces of me for months, storing them up for this moment. The escalator was still running, and I took the steps 3 at a time, nearly falling when my foot caught on the metal grooves, and behind me I could hear footsteps, or what sounded like footsteps, that deliberate click of heels on tile that echoed through the empty store. Except the rhythm was wrong. Too many feet, like every mannequin in the building, had stepped off their platforms and started following me. The employee exit was on the first floor near the loading dock, and I slammed into the door so hard the impact knocked the wind out of me, fumbling with my keycard, while those footsteps got closer, multiplying, surrounding me from different directions. The lock finally clicked open, and I burst out into the cold November air, not stopping until I reached my car parked under the single functioning streetlight in the employee lot. I sat there for 20 minutes with the doors locked and the engine running, watching the store through my rearview mirror, waiting to see someone, anyone, come out after me, but nothing moved except the occasional piece of trash blown by the wind. Finally, I called the police from my car, told them someone had broken into the store, that I'd heard intruders and fled for my safety. 2 officers arrived within 15 minutes, and I waited in my car while they searched the building with the security guard, who'd apparently been asleep in the break room the entire time, and hadn't heard anything unusual. They found Keith from corporate in a storage room on the 3rd floor, surrounded by monitors and recording equipment he'd been using to spy on employees for the past 6 months. He'd installed hidden cameras in the fitting rooms, the break room, even the bathrooms, and had been living in the store after hours, sleeping in different storage areas, stealing food from the cafe, using employee key cards he'd copied to move around undetected. The police found hundreds of hours of recordings, not just of me but of every woman who worked there, spliced and edited into bizarre compilations he'd been uploading to private forums online. He'd been fired from 3 previous retail chains for similar behavior, but somehow kept getting hired because nobody ever pressed charges, just wanted him gone quietly. They arrested him that morning, and I gave my statement at the police station while still wearing my garrison's uniform, which I left balled up in their trash can on my way out, because I knew I'd never wear it again. The store closed permanently 2 months later after the lawsuit, and I heard they turned it into a gym or something, but I've never been back to check. I did go back to school though, studying cybersecurity now. Funny how things work out. And I always check for cameras wherever I go. Always listen for that subtle hum of recording equipment, because once you know someone's been watching you without your knowledge, you never really stop looking over your shoulder. Mom was arguing with the turkey when I walked through the door that Wednesday afternoon, wrestling the 20-pound bird into submission while muttering something about defrosting times and stubborn packaging. I just finished a 12-hour shift at the hospital in Tulsa and driven straight to my parents' farmhouse, still wearing my scrubs under my jacket because I knew she'd panic if I showed up late. The kitchen windows were fogged up from all the cooking, and through the condensation, I could see the wheat fields stretching endlessly under a sky that had turned an odd yellowish-gray color. Ashley, my younger sister, was stationed at the stove stirring gravy with one hand while bouncing her baby on her hip, and her 2 older boys were running circles around the dining table, their sneakers squeaking on the old linoleum. Dad had barricaded himself in the living room with the Weather Channel on, volume cranked up high enough that we could all hear the meteorologist discussing pressure systems and cloud formations. Strange thing about that afternoon was how still everything felt outside. Like nature had hit the pause button while we rushed around inside preparing for tomorrow's feast. Ashley's husband Robert was supposed to arrive later with his mother, and Mom kept checking her phone for updates from my brother Kevin, who was driving in from Arkansas with his new girlfriend none of us had met yet. The house felt alive with all this movement and anticipation, pots bubbling, oven timer beeping, kids yelling about who got to lick the beater from the mashed potatoes. I remember washing my hands at the sink, looking out at our old storm cellar about 50 yards from the house, its wooden doors covered in fallen leaves, and thinking how we hadn't opened that thing since I was probably 16, maybe 17, back when Dad still made us practice tornado drills every spring. Around 4:30, I was helping Ashley peel potatoes when the power flickered once, just quick enough to reset the microwave clock but not enough to worry about. Dad called out from the living room that the weather service had mentioned some cells developing to the southwest, but nothing heading our way. Maybe some rain later tonight at worst. The boys had moved their chaos outside, and through the window I could see them throwing a football around in that aggressive way kids do when they're trying to prove who's tougher. The air through the screen door felt thick and warm for November, almost like breathing through a wet towel, and Mom complained about her arthritis acting up, which she swore meant a storm was coming despite what the weatherman said. I stepped out onto the back porch to call the boys in for a snack, and that's when I noticed how the birds had gone completely silent. Not a single chirp, no crows calling from the fields, even the chickens in their coop had stopped their usual chatter. The sky to the west had turned this sick green color, like old copper, and the clouds were moving in different directions at different heights, creating this twisted, churning effect that made my chest feel tight. But there were no sirens, no emergency alerts buzzing on our phones, just this unnatural quiet that pressed against my eardrums. I called the boys again, louder this time, and they came running toward the house, their football abandoned in the yellowing grass. We'd barely made it inside when the windows started rattling in their frames, subtle at first, like a truck passing on a distant road, except there was no road close enough to cause that kind of vibration. Ashley looked up from the stove, her face suddenly pale, and asked if anyone else heard that low rumbling sound, like a freight train but wrong somehow. Too consistent, too close. Dad jumped up from his recliner and ran to the front door, yanking it open, and I'll never forget the way his whole body went rigid when he saw what was coming. Over his shoulder I could see it too, a dark, writhing column dropping down from the clouds less than a mile away, tearing through the Johnsons' cornfield, throwing debris hundreds of feet into the air like confetti made of destruction. Everything happened so fast after that, but each second stretched out like minutes in my memory. Dad screaming for everyone to get to the cellar now, his voice cracking in a way I'd never heard before, not even when Grandpa died. Mom dropping the glass casserole dish, sending sweet potato chunks and broken ceramic across the floor. Ashley clutching her baby so tight he started wailing, her older boys standing frozen in the doorway, eyes wide as dinner plates. The power cut out completely then, plunging us into this eerie green-tinted darkness, and through the windows we could see transformers exploding in brilliant blue flashes down the road. The rumbling had become a roar, so loud it hurt your teeth, and the whole house started groaning like it was being squeezed in a giant fist. Mom was screaming about the pantry, pointing at the reinforced closet under the stairs where we kept the canned goods and cleaning supplies, saying it was closer, safer, we'd never make it to the cellar in time. But Dad was already pushing us toward the back door, yelling that the house wouldn't hold, that the pantry was a death trap. We had to get underground. I grabbed the two older boys, one under each arm, while Ashley struggled with the baby, and Mom stood paralyzed between the two options, her hands shaking as she looked back and forth between Dad at the back door and the pantry door just 10 feet away. The wind hit the house then, not gradually but all at once, like getting slammed by an invisible wall, and suddenly the kitchen window exploded inward, sending glass shards across the room where we'd been standing seconds before. Dad made the choice for all of us, grabbing Mom's wrist and dragging her toward the back door while shouting at me to run. Just run. Don't look back. The second we stepped outside, the wind tried to rip us apart, pulling at our clothes, our hair, making it impossible to breathe without turning your head sideways. The 50 yards to the storm cellar looked like 50 miles, the wooden doors barely visible through the horizontal rain that had started falling, mixed with dirt and pieces of corn stalks and God knows what else. I could hear metal screeching behind us, probably the barn roof peeling away like a tin can lid, and Ashley's oldest boy was screaming in my arms, his voice barely audible over the apocalyptic noise that surrounded us from every direction. Dad reached the cellar doors first, fighting against the wind to pull them open, the old hinges screaming in protest after years of neglect. The left door ripped completely off its hinges the moment he got it open, flying away into the chaos like it weighed nothing. But the right door held long enough for him to push Mom down the concrete steps into the darkness below. I practically threw the boys down after her, hearing them tumble and cry out. But there was no time to be gentle, no time for anything but survival. Ashley was right behind me with the baby, and we all crashed down those steps in a tangle of limbs and terror. The temperature dropping 20 degrees the moment we got below ground level, the musty smell of old earth and decades of spider webs filling our nostrils. Dad slammed the remaining door shut above us and wedged a 2x4 through the handle, just as something massive struck the ground where we'd been standing moments before, probably a piece of farm equipment or part of somebody's roof. The cellar was pitch black and we huddled together on the damp floor, feeling around for each other in the darkness while the world above us came apart. The noise was indescribable, like being inside a blender made of thunder and breaking glass, punctuated by impacts that shook dirt loose from the ceiling onto our heads. Mom was praying out loud, the Lord's Prayer over and over, while Ashley's baby screamed himself hoarse, and the older boys clung to whoever they could reach, their fingernails digging into skin through clothing. I could taste blood in my mouth from where I'd bitten my tongue during the fall, and my ankle throbbed from landing wrong on the concrete. But all I could think about was whether that single wooden door and rusty 2x4 would hold against whatever nightmare was passing overhead. It lasted maybe 3 minutes, though it felt like 3 hours, the tornado passing directly over us with a sound I can only describe as pure destruction given voice. At one point, the door above us lifted several inches despite the 2x4, and we could see a sliver of greenish light and swirling debris before it slammed back down, the wood cracking but miraculously holding. Then, just as suddenly as it had arrived, the roar began to fade, moving away toward the east, leaving behind an eerie silence broken only by the sound of rain pattering on what was left above us and the baby's exhausted whimpers. We stayed frozen in place for another 10 minutes, nobody brave enough to speak or move, until finally Dad used his phone's flashlight to illuminate our faces, all of us covered in dirt and cobwebs, eyes wide with shock but alive, every single one of us alive. When we finally emerged from the cellar, the landscape was unrecognizable, like someone had taken our farm and put it through a giant shredder. The house was still standing but missing half its roof, Mom's kitchen exposed to the sky like a dollhouse with its front wall removed. The barn was completely gone, just a concrete foundation with some twisted metal beams pointing at odd angles. Dad's truck had been thrown into the wheat field at least 200 yards away, sitting upside down like a dead beetle. But the weirdest thing, the detail that still gives me chills when I think about it, was Mom's turkey, the one she'd been fighting with just an hour earlier, sitting perfectly intact in its roasting pan on the kitchen counter, visible through the missing wall, not even shifted an inch from where she'd left it. We ended up having Thanksgiving at a motel in town, eating Chinese takeout because every restaurant was either damaged or overwhelmed with displaced families. But we were together, and after what we'd survived, orange chicken and fried rice felt like the finest feast in the world. When you sign up for an overnight stocking shift at Save More the week before Thanksgiving, nobody tells you about the silence. Not the peaceful kind either. The kind that presses against your eardrums and makes you aware of every single sound your body produces. I needed the extra money that year, simple as that. My landlord had just raised rent by $200, and my day job doing data entry at an insurance office barely covered groceries after bills. The overnight differential was an extra $4 an hour, and they were desperate enough to hire anyone willing to work from 11 at night until 7 in the morning. I showed up for my first shift on a Wednesday in late November, 3 days before Thanksgiving. wearing the ugly green vest they issued me and steel-toed boots I borrowed from my cousin. The store manager, a tired-looking woman named Veronica with graying hair pulled into a tight bun, gave me a 10-minute tour of the back room, showed me how to use the pallet jack, and told me the freezer alarm code before disappearing into her office. She mentioned I would be alone most nights since the other stalker, some guy named Julian, had quit 2 weeks prior without notice. That should have been my first red flag. The first few hours passed without incident. I unloaded boxes of canned goods, restocked the cereal aisle, and tried not to think about how the store felt like a massive tomb once all the customers left. The fluorescent lights hummed constantly, this low electrical drone that never quite faded into the background. Around 1 a.m, the PA system kicked on with its looping advertisement about Black Friday doorbusters, the same cheerful voice repeating the same script every 12 minutes. Save More is your destination for Black Friday savings. Join us Friday morning at 5 a.m. for doorbuster deals you cannot miss. After the 5th time hearing it, I wanted to rip the speakers out of the ceiling, but the money kept me moving, kept me stacking boxes of pasta sauce and rotating stock like Veronica had shown me. The store layout was simple enough, 12 aisles plus the produce section up front and the meat and dairy cases along the back wall. I worked methodically, starting from aisle 1 and planning to move through them all before my shift ended. By 2 a.m, I had made it to aisle 7, the snack aisle, when I heard it for the first time. The distinct metallic rattle of a shopping cart wheel. That specific sound of a cart being pushed slowly across linoleum tile. I stopped mid-reach, a box of crackers in my hands, and listened. The sound came from somewhere toward the front of the store, near the produce section. Then it stopped. I set the box down and walked toward the end of the aisle, poking my head out to scan the front area. Nothing. Empty checkout lanes, dark register screens, and the produce misters cycling through their timed spray sequence with a soft hiss. Maybe the building was settling, I told myself. Old stores make weird noises. Pipes, ventilation systems, the refrigeration units kicking on and off. I had read somewhere that big empty spaces play tricks on your hearing, that your brain tries to fill the silence with familiar sounds. That had to be it. I walked back to my cart of stock boxes and kept working, but I kept one ear tuned to the rest of the store now. For the next 20 minutes, everything stayed quiet, except for that looping PA announcement and the buzz of the lights. Then, as I was breaking down empty cardboard boxes with my box cutter, I heard it again. The cart sound, but closer this time. Aisle 9, maybe aisle 10. The sound was deliberate, not the random rolling of a loose cart drifting on uneven floor. This was the sound of someone pushing a cart at a leisurely pace, the way shoppers do when they are browsing. I called out, my voice sounding too loud in the empty store. "Hello? Store's closed." No answer. Just that damn PA system starting up again with its Black Friday spiel. I left my boxes and walked quickly toward the back of the store where the sound had come from, my boots squeaking on the waxed floor. When I rounded the corner into aisle 9, the baking aisle, it was empty. Bags of flour and sugar stared back at me from perfectly organized shelves. No cart, no person, nothing out of place. I stood there for a moment, my pulse ticking faster than I wanted to admit, and scanned the entire aisle from one end to the other. The fluorescent lights above flickered once, a brief stutter that made the shadows jump then steadied again. I checked aisle 10 next, then aisle 11, all empty. The rational part of my brain tried to convince me I was tired, that working overnight messes with your senses, that I probably heard the sound from outside the building. Maybe someone was pushing a cart through the parking lot, returning it to the corral. But it was 2:15 in the morning on a Wednesday night in late November. Who the hell would be in the parking lot? I made my way to the front windows and pressed my face against the cold glass, cupping my hands around my eyes to block the interior light. The parking lot stretched out dark and empty under the orange glow of the streetlights. My car sat alone near the employee entrance, covered in a thin layer of frost. Not another vehicle in sight. Not a person, not a cart, Nothing moving at all. I went back to work because the alternative was standing around letting my imagination run wild, and I needed this job too much to walk out over some unexplained noises. Veronica had left me a list of priority items to stock before the morning shift arrived, and I was already behind schedule. I pushed my pallet jack toward the dairy section at the back of the store, where 3 pallets of milk and yogurt waited in the walk-in cooler. The cooler door was one of those heavy industrial things with a silver handle you had to really pull to open. Inside, the temperature dropped to maybe 38 degrees, and my breath came out in visible puffs. I worked quickly, loading my flatbed cart with milk crates when I noticed something odd. One of the security cameras mounted in the corner of the cooler, the small black dome kind that usually just blend into the ceiling, had a red light blinking on it. I had been in that cooler 3 times already tonight, and I swear that light had not been on before. Security cameras do not usually have visible lights, do they? I stared at it for a moment, that little red pinpoint blinking in a steady rhythm, and felt an uncomfortable sensation crawl up my spine. Someone was watching. Had to be Veronica in her office, checking the cameras to make sure I was not slacking off. That made sense. I grabbed my loaded cart and backed out of the cooler, letting the heavy door swing shut with a pneumatic hiss. When I turned around to head back into the store proper, I saw something that made my breath catch in my throat. At the far end of the store, in the frozen food aisle, someone was standing completely still between the glass freezer doors. A person, definitely a person, just standing there facing in my direction. They wore dark clothing, maybe a coat or a hoodie, and they were not moving at all. Not shopping, not walking, just standing there like a mannequin. My first instinct was relief, honestly. Finally, an explanation. Someone else was in the store, probably another employee I had not been told about, or maybe a manager doing a walkthrough. But then the relief curdled into something else when I realized whoever it was had been standing there silently while I had been calling out earlier. Why had they not answered me? Why were they just standing there now, motionless in the frozen food section at 2:30 in the morning? I abandoned my cart right there in the dairy section and started walking toward them, my footsteps echoing in the quiet store. "Hey," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady and friendly. "You scared the hell out of me. Did not know anyone else was here." The figure did not move, did not respond, did not even shift their weight. As I got closer, maybe 30 feet away now, I could see they were facing directly toward me, or maybe toward the dairy section I had just come from. Their posture was rigid, arms hanging straight at their sides. The PA system chose that exact moment to crackle to life again. Save More is your destination for Black Friday savings. I stopped walking when I got about 20 feet away, close enough now to see that the person was wearing a dark blue or black hoodie with the hood pulled up. Their face was in shadow, but I could feel them looking at me. Not glancing, not casually observing, but staring with an intensity that made every instinct in my body scream at me to back away. "Can I help you with something?" I tried again, and my voice came out thinner than I intended. Still nothing. No movement, no acknowledgement, no sign they had even heard me. The frozen food cases hummed loudly in the silence that followed, their motors working overtime to keep the temperature down. I could see my reflection in the glass doors behind the figure, distorted and ghostly. That was when I noticed their hands. They were not just hanging at their sides naturally. They were clenched into tight fists, the kind of tension you see in someone who is either terrified or furious. My throat went dry. This was not right. Nothing about this was right. I took a step backward, then another, keeping my eyes on the motionless figure. They still had not moved, had not even seemed to breathe. "I'm going to call the manager," I said, louder now, trying to project authority I did not feel. "You need to leave." The figure's head tilted slowly to the left, just a few degrees, like they were considering my words. That tiny movement was somehow worse than the stillness had been. I turned and walked quickly back toward the front of the store where Veronica's office was located, my heart hammering against my ribs. I did not run because some stupid part of my pride did not want to look like I was panicking, but I definitely moved faster than a casual walk. When I reached the office door, I knocked hard 3 times. "Veronica, we have a situation." No answer. I tried the handle and found it locked. I knocked again, harder this time, my knuckles stinging against the wood. "Veronica, are you in there?" Nothing. The whole office area was dark, and when I pressed my face against the small window in the door, I could see her desk chair was empty. Her computer was off. She was gone. Had been gone, probably since shortly after I arrived. My mouth felt like sandpaper. I was completely alone in this store with whoever or whatever that was standing in the frozen food aisle. The security office was next to Veronica's office, a small room with monitors showing different camera angles throughout the store. The door was unlocked and I practically fell into the room, slamming it behind me. 6 monitors were mounted on the wall, each one cycling through different camera feeds every few seconds. I scanned them frantically, looking for the frozen food aisle. There, camera 3. The feed showed the frozen food section from an elevated angle, giving a clear view down the entire aisle. The figure was still there, still standing in the exact same position, facing toward the camera now. Toward me. But here is what made my heart nearly stop. As I watched the monitor, the figure raised one arm slowly, mechanically, and pointed directly at the camera. Not vaguely in that direction, directly at the lens, like they knew exactly where it was, like they knew I was watching. My chair squeaked as I jerked backward, nearly tipping over. I grabbed the edge of the desk to steady myself, my eyes locked on that screen. The figure held that position, arm extended, finger pointing, for what felt like an eternity but was probably only 10 or 15 seconds. Then they lowered their arm and turned, walking out of frame with stiff, deliberate steps. I cycled through the other camera feeds, my fingers slipping on the controls because my palms were slick with sweat. Camera 1 showed the front entrance, empty. Camera 2 showed the produce section, empty. Camera 4 showed the checkout lanes, empty. Camera 5 showed aisle 3, empty. Camera 6 showed the back stockroom, not empty. The figure was there, standing next to the loading bay door, the same rigid posture, facing directly toward camera 6, facing toward me again. How had they moved that fast? The stockroom was on the opposite end of the store from the frozen food section. It would have taken at least 2 minutes to walk that distance, but only seconds had passed since they left frame on camera 3. I did the only thing that made sense in that moment. I pulled out my phone and called 911. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it twice before getting it to my ear. The dispatcher answered on the second ring, a woman with a calm, professional voice asking about my emergency. I tried to explain, the words tumbling out in a jumbled mess about someone in the store, someone acting strange, someone who was not supposed to be here. She asked if the person had threatened me, if they had a weapon, if I was in immediate danger. I did not know how to answer that. They had not threatened me with words, had not shown a weapon, but every fiber of my being was screaming that I was in danger. "Just send someone," I finally said, my voice cracking. "Please, just send the police." She assured me a unit was on the way and told me to stay on the line, to lock myself in a safe place and not confront the intruder. I kept my eyes on the monitors while she spoke. The figure remained in the stockroom, motionless again, that same awful stillness. Then the screen went black. Not just camera 6, all of them. Every monitor shut off simultaneously, plunging the security office into darkness except for the faint glow of my phone screen. The hum of the monitors died, replaced by a silence so complete it felt like pressure in my ears. I sat in that dark security office with the dispatcher still talking in my ear, asking if I was okay, if I was still there. I whispered that the power had gone out, that I could not see anything, and she told me to stay calm, that officers were 3 minutes away. 3 minutes felt like 3 hours. I stared at the dark monitors, my phone providing the only light, and listened. Listened for footsteps, for breathing, for that damn cart sound, for anything that would tell me where the figure was now. The store had gone completely silent. Even the PA system had stopped its loop. No fluorescent buzz, no refrigeration hum, nothing. Then I heard it. Not a cart this time, footsteps. Slow, measured footsteps in the hallway outside the security office, coming closer. The dispatcher was saying something about staying hidden, about not making noise, but I could barely process her words. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. I could see the shadow of feet blocking the light from under the door frame. Someone was standing there, standing and waiting. My breath came in short, shallow gasps that I tried desperately to quiet. The door handle rattled once, tested, locked. Thank God I had locked it. The shadow remained for what might have been 30 seconds or 5 minutes. Time had lost all meaning, and then the footsteps retreated back down the hallway. I did not move, did not breathe, did not do anything except grip my phone and pray that the police would arrive before that door opened. When I finally heard sirens in the distance growing louder, approaching the store, I almost cried with relief. The footsteps had long since faded, and the store remained dark and silent. Red and blue lights began flashing through the front windows, painting the walls in alternating colors. I heard car doors slam, voices shouting, and then heavy footsteps, multiple sets, moving through the store. Police, if anyone is in here, make yourself known. I unlocked the security office door and stumbled out into the hallway, nearly colliding with 2 officers who had their flashlights raised. They brought me outside while 3 more officers swept the building, searching every aisle, every corner, every possible hiding place. I stood in the parking lot wrapped in a blanket someone had given me, watching them work. 40 minutes later, they emerged with their report. The store was empty, no signs of forced entry. No evidence of anyone else being inside, no figure in a hoodie, nothing. They found the main breaker had been flipped off, which explained the power outage and the dead cameras, but they could not explain who had done it or why. The loading bay door in the stockroom, they told me, had been unlocked from the inside. Someone had definitely been in there. Someone had gotten in, moved through that store like they owned it, and left without a trace. The police filed a report, checked the recordings from before the cameras died, but the footage showed nothing useful. Just me working alone in empty aisles. I never went back for another shift. Veronica called me the next day, annoyed that I had abandoned my post, and I told her exactly what happened. She went quiet for a long time before saying that Julian, the guy who quit 2 weeks before me, had reported similar experiences on his last few nights. Carts moving on their own, sounds he could not explain, a feeling of being watched. She had not mentioned it during my training because she thought he was just trying to get out of his contract. I hung up on her. Savemore hired someone new within a week, and I heard through a friend of a friend that they did not last long either. Whatever was in that store, whoever was playing that sick game, I want no part of it. I took a pay cut and went back to just my day job. Some extra money is not worth that kind of terror. Finals week had just crushed me when I posted in that Riverside County Buy Nothing group, asking if anyone had a dolly I could borrow. My roommate Ivy and I were moving a busted futon out of our dorm before Thanksgiving break, and the campus maintenance guys wanted $40 just to haul it to the dumpster. $40 I definitely didn't have. I'd turned 19 3 weeks earlier, and my birthday money from my parents had already gone toward textbooks I should have bought used. The futon had been free off someone's curb back in August, so paying to get rid of it felt like some kind of cosmic joke. Within 10 minutes of posting, this guy named Connor messaged me saying he had a moving dolly and could help me load the futon into a truck if I needed. His profile looked normal enough. Pictures of him at what looked like a Padres game, a photo with an older couple who I assumed were his parents, a few shots of him hiking somewhere with red rocks in the background. He worked in IT support according to his page. 26 years old. He seemed harmless, maybe even nice for offering to help a stranger. We messaged back and forth for a few days, just logistics stuff about when I needed the dolly and whether I had access to a vehicle. He mentioned he lived pretty close to campus, just off Village Drive near that shopping center with the Trader Joe's everyone always mobbed on Sundays. Said I could swing by and grab the dolly myself, or he could drive it over and help me move the futon since it was a two-person job anyway. I was hesitant at first because, stranger danger and all that. But Ivy was going to be with me and it was the middle of the day. Plus, this dude had like 400 friends on Facebook and photos going back years. Serial killers don't usually maintain that kind of social media presence, right? That's what I told myself anyway. We settled on Wednesday afternoon, November 9th. He'd meet me at my dorm. We'd load up the futon in his truck and he'd help me dump it. Simple, free. I even felt a little guilty for being suspicious of someone just trying to be helpful. Wednesday morning, Ivy texted me that she'd gotten called in for an emergency shift at the campus library. Some girl had quit without notice, and they were desperate. Ivy needed the hours anyway, so I told her not to worry about it. I'd just meet Connor myself, get the futon loaded, and be done in 30 minutes tops. When he pulled up in a blue Toyota Tacoma around 2 in the afternoon, he looked exactly like his photos. Average height, brown hair, wearing a gray hoodie and jeans. He had this friendly, easygoing smile, and immediately started apologizing for not bringing the dolly after all. Said he'd forgotten it was actually his roommate's, and the guy had taken it to help his girlfriend move that same day. Total coincidence, super sorry, but he had moving straps in his truck that would work even better for a futon. The way he said it was so casual and apologetic that I didn't think twice. We carried the futon down 3 flights of stairs, and yeah, those straps actually did make it easier. He kept making jokes about how this thing probably weighed more than both of us combined and asking what the hell futons were even stuffed with. Concrete mix? I laughed. He seemed genuinely funny, not creepy at all. When we got the futon loaded in his truck bed, he asked if I wanted to grab coffee after we dumped it. Said there was a good place near his apartment and he'd buy since I was a broke college student and he remembered those days. I almost said yes because honestly, he'd just helped me haul furniture for free and seemed like a decent person. But something made me hesitate, not in a scared way, more in a, I have a ton of studying to do and I look like garbage right now way. I told him maybe another time. I really had to hit the books. He didn't push it at all, just said no problem and asked where the dumpster was. I directed him to the big waste area behind the dining hall. But when we got there, he frowned and said the dumpster was completely full, which it was. There was already furniture and trash piled around it. He suggested we could take it to the actual dump site across town, but that would cost a fee. Or, he said, he had storage space in his apartment complex where we could leave it temporarily, and he'd deal with it later. He lived 5 minutes away. It seemed reasonable. I'd already taken up so much of his time. I said, sure, that would be great. Thank you so much. He smiled that same friendly smile, and we drove toward Village Drive. His apartment complex was one of those newer builds with the fake stone facades and names that try to sound fancy. Parkside Terrace or Parkview Terrace, something like that, even though there wasn't a park anywhere near it. He pulled into a spot and said the storage area was actually in the basement near his unit. Easier to just go through his place than walk all the way around the building. Made sense. I followed him up an exterior staircase to the 2nd floor. The hallway smelled like someone had burned popcorn recently and was trying to cover it with air freshener. He unlocked his door, number 2G, and held it open for me to walk in first. The apartment was weirdly clean, like suspiciously clean for a 26-year-old guy living alone. No dishes in the sink, no clutter, everything organized. Beige couch, glass coffee table, flat screen mounted on the wall. A few framed prints of generic landscape photos. It looked like a staged apartment in a rental ad. He walked past me toward what I assumed was the storage closet or basement access, and I heard the door click shut behind me. Not slam, just that soft, final click of a door closing on its own. I turned around and tried the handle. Locked. The kind of lock that needed a key from the inside too. One of those deadbolts. My heart started doing this weird flutter thing, but I kept my voice normal when I asked him if the door locked automatically. He was standing in the kitchen area now, maybe 10 feet away, and he looked at me with this completely calm expression. Said, "Yeah, it's a security feature. Lots of apartments have them now. Fire hazard though," he added, almost like it was a joke. Then he asked if I wanted water or anything. His voice was still friendly, still casual, but something had shifted in the air. I couldn't pinpoint what exactly. I said, "No thanks, I really should get going soon. I had a study group at 4. He nodded slowly and said, Sure, but then he asked me if I'd noticed anything weird about our conversations. The way he said, "our conversations," made my spine go rigid. Plural, like there had been more than just the Facebook messages. I told him I didn't know what he meant. My phone was in my back pocket and I was calculating how fast I could unlock it and dial 911 if I needed to. He walked toward the couch and picked up his laptop from the coffee table, opened it, and turned the screen toward me. It was our Facebook message thread. All of it. Screenshots going back to that first day I'd posted about the dolly. But there were other screenshots too, ones I didn't recognize. Photos of me walking across campus, me sitting outside the student union with my coffee, me and Ivy at the dining hall. My throat went completely dry. He scrolled down and there were more. Text messages. My text messages. Conversations I'd had with Ivy, with my mom, with a guy named Troy from my biology class who I'd been casually texting. Messages I'd sent from my phone. Private messages. He'd been reading everything. He asked me, in that same calm voice, if I knew how easy it was to clone someone's phone data, if you had the right software. Said he worked in IT, like I knew. And it was honestly scary how much access people didn't realize they were giving away. When I'd clicked on that link he'd sent me last week, the one that was supposed to be photos of his truck so I'd recognize it, that's all it took. One click. He had everything. I couldn't form words for a second. My brain was trying to process what he was showing me, what he was saying. He'd been reading my texts for over a week. He knew where I went, who I talked to, what I said in private. He knew Ivy wasn't coming today because he'd read her text to me that morning. He'd planned this. The dolly, the dumpster being full, all of it. My voice came out shaky when I asked him what he wanted, why he was doing this. He closed the laptop and set it down gently, then sat on the arm of the couch. Said he wasn't doing anything, really, just wanted to meet me in person, have a real conversation without all the performance people do online. He said I seemed interesting, genuine, not like other girls who were obsessed with their image. He'd been watching my social media for months, actually, since before I even posted in that group. Saw me comment on something back in September and started following my activity. He knew my schedule, my major, where I like to eat lunch. The Facebook post about the futon was just a perfect opportunity. He called it serendipity. I wanted to throw up. I forced myself to stay calm even though every instinct was screaming at me to panic. I asked him, as steadily as I could manage, to please unlock the door so I could leave. Told him I wouldn't tell anyone about any of this. I just wanted to go home. He tilted his head like he was considering it, then said he would, absolutely. But he wanted to show me one more thing first. He pulled out his phone and opened a recording app, pressed play. It was my voice from 20 minutes ago in his truck, talking about my studying, laughing at his jokes about the futon. Then my voice from earlier in the week, audio from a phone call I'd had with my mom about Thanksgiving plans. He'd recorded everything, every conversation we'd had in person, every phone call I'd made in the past week. He said he liked to keep records, to document connections. Made them more real somehow, more permanent. He looked genuinely proud of himself, like he'd shown me something impressive rather than absolutely terrifying. That's when I realized he genuinely didn't think he was doing anything wrong. In his mind, this was normal. This was just him being thorough, being interested. That scared me more than anything else, that total disconnect. My hand moved to my pocket, but he noticed immediately. Told me not to bother with my phone because he'd disabled my cellular connection remotely about 5 minutes ago. Could turn it back on whenever he wanted. He said it so matter-of-factly, like he was explaining how to use a coffee maker. Then he stood up and walked closer to me, not threatening, just casual, and said we should sit down and talk for real. Get to know each other without screens between us. He'd made tea earlier, it was probably still warm. The way he was acting, like this was a normal social interaction, like I was a guest who'd come over willingly, made my skin feel wrong on my body. I backed up until I hit the door. Told him I really needed to leave right now. My voice cracked on the last word. He sighed, and for the first time, he looked annoyed. Said I was being dramatic, that he wasn't going to hurt me, he just wanted to talk. Why was everyone always so paranoid these days? He gestured toward the couch again, more insistent this time. Sit down, please. I didn't sit. Instead, I did the only thing I could think of. I started talking. Told him okay, I'd stay and talk, but could I please just let someone know where I am first? Ivy would worry if I didn't check in. He considered this, then said no. That would defeat the purpose. Nobody else needed to know about our time together. This was private, but I kept pushing, kept my voice as calm as I could. Said if I didn't text Ivy in the next 10 minutes, she'd already know something was wrong because we had a system. We always told each other where we were. Complete lie, but I sold it. Told him she knew I was here at Parkside Terrace, apartment 2G, with someone named Connor from the Facebook group. His expression changed slightly. That annoyed look turned into something more calculating. He asked when I'd told her that. I said this morning before Ivy left for work. Texted her his address just in case. Another lie, but a good one. He stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him working through the implications. If I was telling the truth, someone knew exactly where I was. Someone who would notice if I disappeared. He walked back to the kitchen area, put some distance between us, and I watched him think. The apartment was completely silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. Finally, he said, fine. He'd let me go, but I needed to delete all our Facebook messages first, right now in front of him, and I couldn't tell anyone about the phone cloning or the recordings. If I did, he'd release every private message I'd ever sent to everyone I knew. My family, my professors, everyone. He had them all backed up in multiple places. He said this without any emotion, like he was negotiating a business deal. I agreed immediately. Took out my phone, which suddenly had service again, and deleted our entire message thread while he watched. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely tap the screen correctly. But I got it done. He seemed satisfied. Walked to the door, unlocked it with a key from his pocket, and opened it. Told me it was nice meeting me in person. Hoped we could stay in touch. I didn't respond. Just walked out of that apartment as fast as I could without running, down the stairs, across the parking lot, and I didn't stop moving until I was 6 blocks away. I called Ivy from a Target parking lot and told her everything. She wanted me to go to the police immediately, but I was terrified of what he'd do with those messages if I reported him. Some of them were embarrassing. Private stuff I'd said about people, complaints about professors, personal things about my family. The idea of everyone seeing those made me feel sick, but Ivy convinced me we at least needed to document what happened, even if I didn't file charges right away. We went to campus police together that evening. I brought my phone, showed them the deleted Facebook messages that were still in my archive, explained about the cloned data and the recordings. The officer who took my report was this older woman, Officer Stephanie Reeves, and she didn't dismiss me or act like I was overreacting. She said this was illegal on multiple levels: unauthorized access to electronic communications, stalking, false imprisonment. She explained that even if he had my messages, releasing them as revenge would be another crime, and that he'd be facing serious charges already. That helped. Knowing he'd actually committed crimes, that this wasn't just me being paranoid or dramatic like he'd said. Campus police contacted the local department, and they got a warrant for his apartment within 48 hours. Turns out I wasn't the first person Connor had done this to. They found data from 3 other women on his laptop, all college students from the area, all people he'd connected with through various online groups over the past 2 years. None of them had reported him because he'd used the same leverage on them, threatened to release private information if they told anyone. One girl had graduated and moved to Arizona specifically to get away from him. The detectives found recording equipment, backup drives, printed photos, everything meticulously organized in folders with our names on them. He'd built an entire system. Connor was arrested and charged with multiple felonies including wiretapping, computer fraud, stalking, and unlawful restraint. His bail was set high enough that he couldn't pay it. The prosecutor told me he'd likely take a plea deal to avoid trial. And he did. 18 months in county jail, followed by 3 years probation, mandatory counseling, and a permanent restraining order. He's also a registered offender now in the state database. I grew up in a quiet town tucked between old coal hills and maple woods in Pennsylvania, the kind of place where everyone knows whose truck that is by the sound of its engine. Back then, I was working part-time at a diner off the main road, pulling double shifts before Thanksgiving week. My nights usually ended around 11, walking home with the cold biting through my jacket and that faint smell of fuel always drifting from Murphy's Auto Repair down the street. Murphy's had been there forever. A squat gray building with a single flickering sign and 3 gas pumps that hardly worked in the winter. That night, just after midnight, I was sitting in my kitchen reheating leftovers when the sound hit. A deep, violent crack that made the window panes flex. For a second I thought a plane had gone down or something exploded in the hills. The lights flickered once, then the world outside glowed orange through the frost on the glass. I ran out barefoot, the air thick with the chemical tang of burning rubber and gasoline. From the corner of Maple Street, I could see flames clawing up the side of Murphy's garage like they were alive. People started spilling out of their houses, shouting names, pulling on coats. The volunteer fire trucks arrived fast. This town might be small, but everyone took pride in showing up when it mattered. The air was chaos, sparks popping, hoses hissing, and the low roar of fire devouring metal. I remember seeing old Tom Murphy himself, standing across the street in his slippers, just staring. He didn't say a word, didn't move toward the building, even when one of the firefighters yelled his name. It struck me as strange, his silence, the way he clutched a set of keys like he couldn't let go. By the time the flames were finally out, the garage looked like a skeleton. The smell was unbearable, something between melted plastic and diesel smoke. Everyone assumed it was some kind of electrical issue or maybe a gas leak, but the firefighters seemed uneasy. They taped off the whole area and kept the rest of us back. Around 2 in the morning, I overheard one of them muttering that they'd found signs someone had been siphoning fuel from the underground tanks. That part didn't make sense. Hardly anyone in town even knew how to open those access caps, let alone pull gas from them. The next morning, the whole town felt different. You could smell the burned rubber half a mile away, and the air had that weird stillness that comes after something big happens. Everyone had a theory. Some said it was teenagers fooling around. Others whispered about insurance money. When I went to grab breakfast at the diner, half the customers were talking about the fire like it was a movie they'd all seen from different angles. Then Tom Murphy walked in, looking like he hadn't slept at all. His face was pale, his hand still stained with soot, but what caught my attention was how calm he seemed, almost rehearsed, like he was already telling a story he'd practiced all night. He sat at the counter and told the waitress that his security cameras had malfunctioned earlier that evening, that the system had automatically wiped the footage before the explosion. No one said anything for a second. You could hear the ceiling fan turning. Then someone asked if he'd called his insurance company, and he just nodded slowly, staring into his coffee. Something about it didn't sit right with me. Murphy wasn't the kind of guy who believed in coincidences, but he kept repeating that word, accidentally, like he wanted to convince himself more than anyone else. That night, I couldn't sleep. The smell of gas seemed stronger in my house than it had any right to be, even with the windows closed. I kept thinking about the timing, how the cameras went down hours before the fire, how he'd been standing across the street without a single burn, holding those keys. Around 1 a.m., I put on my jacket and walked back toward the site. The fire trucks were gone, but the tape still fluttered in the wind. The metal was still warm when I got close enough to feel it radiating through my jeans. A few stray tools were scattered in the gravel, a socket wrench, a glove, and an old siphon pump lying half-melted near the fence. While I was standing there, a pickup turned the corner, its headlights sweeping across the debris. I recognized it right away. It belonged to a guy named Eli who used to work at Murphy's before quitting last spring. He slowed down when he saw me, rolled his window halfway, and asked what I was doing there. His voice sounded rough, almost defensive. I told him I was just looking, couldn't sleep. He nodded once and said, "Some folks shouldn't dig too deep, kid," before driving off. His words stuck with me the whole walk home, echoing louder than the wind. 2 days later, the investigators showed up from the state fire marshal's office. They parked a white van by the curb and spent hours digging through the rubble while half the town watched from the sidewalk. By noon, rumors were already flying. Someone claimed they'd found tire tracks leading into the back lot. Someone else swore they'd seen Murphy at the shop late the night before the explosion. The weirdest part? Every time someone mentioned the missing footage, Murphy brushed it off like it was no big deal. Said the system had been acting up for months. But when I asked one of the firefighters if that was true, he frowned and said, "Funny thing, I helped install those cameras last summer. They were brand new." That evening, the town's power went out for almost an hour. I sat on my porch, listening to the faint hum of generators kicking in around the neighborhood. The darkness made me uneasy, not just because of the fire, but because everything suddenly felt too quiet. I could see the outline of the ruined shop down the block, barely visible against the sky. For a second, I thought I saw movement inside the wreck, like someone holding a flashlight. But when I blinked, it was gone. A minute later, a car door slammed somewhere, and I caught a whiff of gasoline, sharp and raw. By morning, the news spread that someone had broken into the taped-off area during the night. The police said nothing was taken, but one of the inspector's toolboxes had been opened and left half submerged in the puddles near the pumps. When I passed by, I noticed fresh footprints leading away toward the woods behind the lot. The mud was deep from last night's rain, but you could see the tread marks clearly. Heavy boots, definitely a man's. What unsettled me most was the pattern. It looked like he'd been pacing, going back and forth between the tanks before finally disappearing into the trees. That same afternoon, I ran into Eli again at the gas station near the highway. He looked exhausted, eyes red like he hadn't slept. He asked if people were still talking about the explosion, and when I said yes, he sighed and muttered, "Murphy shouldn't have kept those drums down there." I asked what he meant, but he just stared at the counter for a long time, tapping his thumb against the register. Then he whispered, he knew what was leaking. He just didn't want to pay to fix it. Before I could say anything else, he grabbed his pack of cigarettes and left without looking back. That night, I couldn't shake what Eli said. I went down to the public records office the next day during my lunch break to check something. Murphy's auto had been cited twice that year for unsafe fuel storage, both times marked as unresolved. The inspector's notes mentioned corrosion around the underground tanks and the possibility of vapor leaks. The realization hit me hard. Maybe whoever was siphoning gas wasn't just stealing. Maybe they were trying to drain it before something worse happened. But if that were true, why erase the footage? Why pretend nothing was wrong? A week later, heavy rain washed most of the debris away, but the smell of fuel still lingered. People started moving on, decorating for the holidays, pretending life was back to normal. Murphy reopened what was left of the office to handle paperwork, but it looked more like he was packing to leave town. One afternoon, I saw him loading boxes into a rented van, eyes darting up and down the street. When he noticed me watching, he waved, a stiff, nervous gesture, then disappeared inside. That was the last time I saw him. By morning, the van and the sign from the front lot were both gone. Months passed before anyone heard anything new. Then, in the spring, workers digging a new drainage line behind the old shop uncovered a buried drum, one of those industrial-grade fuel containers, rusted through and leaking sludge into the dirt. The city had to call in an environmental crew to contain it. I stopped by while they were working, curious, and one of the guys mentioned there were initials burned into the metal cap. TM, Tom Murphy. When I asked if it was recent, he shook his head. Old, real old, probably buried before those pumps were even installed. No one ever saw Murphy again. Some said he moved down south. Others whispered that he never left, that he'd built those tanks himself years ago and the ground finally caught up to him. Every now and then when the wind blows from that direction, you can still smell it, that faint sting of gasoline in the cold air. I don't know if it's my imagination or something seeping out from underground, but I swear, every time it hits, I can almost hear that explosion again, echoing through the hills like the town's trying to remind us we never really knew what burned that night. I'd gone up to my parents' lake house that weekend mostly to clear my head. They'd retired to Florida a few years ago, but the place in northern Wisconsin was still standing, quiet, still, and tucked between rows of pine trees that swayed like they were whispering to each other. I worked remotely then, designing websites, and I'd been running on caffeine and no sleep for weeks. That little gray cabin felt like the perfect spot to just disconnect, make some soup, maybe read by the fireplace. The lake was half frozen already, the kind of dull silver that reflected nothing back. You could walk outside and hear nothing except the creak of the dock or a crow in the distance. It was peaceful in a way that felt almost heavy. The first morning I noticed the footprints, I didn't think much of them. They started near the tree line and ended right at the edge of the porch, big enough to belong to a grown man but smeared like someone had stepped in mud and dragged their heel. The ground around the lake gets soft after it rains, and I figured maybe a raccoon or stray dog had wandered through and messed up the pattern. Still, it looked weird. The shape wasn't pawed or split, just human, barefoot too. It was November, and the nights dropped below freezing, so that should have been impossible. I remember squatting down, touching the edge of one print, and feeling how crisp the outline was. It hadn't frozen yet, meaning it was fresh. The next day there were more. Same path, same ending, right at the back porch steps. That morning I made coffee and tried to laugh about it, texting my friend Leah a picture with the caption, "Guess I've got a Bigfoot fan." She told me to buy a trail cam and joked that I'd make the news. But there was something about the way the print stopped exactly at the door that started to bother me. It was too deliberate, like someone was walking up and turning back over and over just before reaching the house. I checked the locks twice that night, even though the nearest neighbor was over half a mile away. That evening I curled up on the couch with a blanket, watching the light from the TV flicker across the windows. The lake outside looked like a dark sheet of glass, and every now and then, the old dock moaned as if something heavy shifted against it. Around midnight, I turned the TV off and walked into the kitchen for some water. That's when the motion light outside blinked on, bright, sudden, cutting across the back porch. I froze halfway through the room, staring through the glass door, expecting to see a deer or a raccoon scurrying off. But behind the patio chairs, half hidden by the shadows, was a shape. Someone crouched low, hands pressed against the decking, just waiting. I didn't move for what felt like a full minute. The light buzzed softly, throwing harsh white against the glass, and that shape stayed perfectly still. My first thought was that it had to be a prank, maybe some local kid or a hunter lost from the trails. But the longer I watched, the clearer it became that whoever it was knew I could see them. Their head tilted slightly, like they were studying the reflection, trying to figure out if I was standing there or not. My pulse started thudding in my ears. I reached for my phone on the counter, but the second I turned my body, the light clicked off, plunging everything into black again. When it came back on, nothing. The porch was empty. No footprints visible through the glass, just the soft hiss of wind rolling off the lake. I barely slept that night. Every sound, the groan of the floorboards, the distant pop of ice shifting near the dock, had me sitting upright, listening. At around 3 in the morning, I finally dozed off on the couch with the lamp still on. When I woke up, the footprints were there again, but this time they circled the porch twice before stopping at the door. Whoever it was had come back after the light went off. I called Leah and told her, trying to sound casual, but my voice kept catching. She offered to drive up, but I told her I'd be fine. It was broad daylight, and nothing ever really happens out there, right? By afternoon, I convinced myself it had been some weird coincidence. Maybe a fisherman cutting through the woods, someone curious about the cabin. I tried to work, but I kept glancing out the window every few minutes. Around sunset, I took the flashlight and stepped outside for the first time since the night before. The air was biting cold. The prints were still there, but they stopped abruptly near the deck railing, as if the person had just vanished. I followed them with my light, and about 10 feet into the trees, I found a crumpled soda can and a torn strip of fabric caught on a branch. It looked like part of a flannel shirt, faded red. I pocketed it without thinking, then regretted it the moment I got back inside. That night I kept the living room light on and sat near the window, waiting. It was almost 1 a.m. when the motion light snapped on again, flooding the porch. My breath caught when I saw the figure back in the same spot, crouched low, one hand gripping the leg of the patio chair. This time, he lifted his head slowly, just enough for the light to catch his face. His skin looked pale like wet paper, and his mouth hung slightly open. But his eyes were what froze me. He wasn't looking at the door. He was staring directly at the side window where I was sitting. The light flicked off again after a few seconds, and in that brief darkness, I swear I heard the boards creak under his weight, moving closer. I backed away from the window and grabbed my keys, but my hands felt useless. Every sound in that house seemed amplified. I locked myself in the bathroom, sat on the cold tile, and tried to calm down. After what felt like forever, I forced myself to peek through the blinds again. The light outside was still off, but the chairs on the porch had shifted. One was turned toward the door, like someone had dragged it an inch closer. I didn't hear a car, no crunch of footsteps leaving through the trees. It was just gone. I called the sheriff's office, explained that someone was prowling around the property, and the dispatcher said they'd send a car from the nearest town. It was a long 20 minutes before headlights appeared on the dirt road. When the deputy arrived, he checked the porch with his flashlight, then the yard, and finally the dock. There were prints everywhere now, fresh ones overlapping the old. He asked if anyone else had a key, and I told him only my parents did, and they were in Florida. He suggested I stay somewhere else for the night. I packed a bag so fast I nearly forgot my laptop. Before leaving, I glanced once more through the window. The motion light flicked on again, even though neither of us was outside. The deputy frowned, stepped onto the porch, and waved his arm in front of the sensor. Nothing. It stayed on until we pulled out of the driveway. The next morning, I drove back with him to grab the rest of my stuff. The light was off now, and the prints had filled with frost. The chairs were back in their original place, perfectly aligned. Nothing looked disturbed. But when I opened the door, the smell hit first. Mud and something metallic, like rain mixed with rust. On the kitchen counter, next to the coffee maker, was the strip of red flannel I'd pocketed from the woods. It wasn't damp anymore. It was folded neatly in half, placed right beside my mug. I don't know how to explain it because I'd left that piece in the glove compartment of my car. I never went back after that. My parents eventually sold the house, and I didn't argue. Every now and then when I visit a lakeside cabin or see motion lights flicker through the trees, that same cold rush hits me. The memory of that still figure crouched behind the furniture, waiting for me to turn the lights off. I still wonder if he'd been watching longer than I realized, stepping closer each night, stopping just short of the door. Maybe he was waiting for me to step outside first. It was the tail end of Black Friday, and the store looked like a battlefield that had just been evacuated. I worked the late shift at a mid-sized retail chain in northern Illinois, mostly handling restocks and cleanup after the madness. The kind of place that sold everything from kitchenware to cheap electronics. I'd been there for 2 years, juggling night classes during the week and surviving on vending machine coffee. That night, most of the crew clocked out around midnight, leaving just me and Mark, the night manager, to finish loading the shelves before the morning crew came in. The hum of the fluorescent lights had a way of getting into your head after a while. Constant, dull, like a mosquito you can't find. Every now and then one of them flickered overhead, and the shadows on the linoleum seemed to shift with it. The air was still heavy with that mix of burnt coffee, cardboard dust, and cheap plastic. I had a pallet full of Bluetooth speakers to move to the back room, and as I rolled it across the empty aisles, the sound of the wheels echoed far louder than it should have. It was the first time all day the store had gone completely silent. Near the customer service counter, we had a set of monitors that displayed the security camera feeds. I glanced at them mostly out of habit, checking if Mark was still in the stockroom or sneaking another cigarette out back. But one of the screens caught my eye. The feed from the electronics section, aisle 9, showed movement, a tall figure walking slowly between the shelves. At first, I thought it was a delayed playback from earlier in the day. Those cameras glitched sometimes after a long shift, but the timestamp in the corner was live. 12:47 a.m. I radioed Mark to ask if he was in the electronics section, but his muffled reply came from the back. He hadn't left the stockroom. My gut told me maybe someone got locked in after closing. Maybe a customer hiding out. It happened before. A drunk college kid once fell asleep in the patio furniture display. So I grabbed my flashlight and headed that way, trying to make as much noise as possible so whoever it was would know I was coming. The closer I got, the louder that hum from the lights seemed to buzz in my ears, until the sound almost felt alive. When I turned the corner into aisle 9, the first thing I noticed was how cold it felt compared to the rest of the store. Not a normal kind of cold, more like the air conditioning had kicked on just for that section. My footsteps echoed sharply off the polished floor as I scanned the shelves with my flashlight. Rows of headphones, phone chargers, empty boxes, and not a single sound except the faint electric hum above me. I called out, "Hey, store's closed, you can't be back here." My voice bounced through the aisles, but no one answered. I stood still for a moment, listening. Somewhere, faintly, a display TV flickered to life, playing static. I checked behind every end cap, even crouched to look under the shelves, thinking maybe someone was messing around. Nothing. When I walked back toward the service counter, I glanced up at the camera dome above aisle 9 and saw the red light still blinking. It was recording. Back at the monitor wall, I rewound the feed a few seconds, expecting to see myself searching with the flashlight. Instead, I watched something step out from behind the shelves just after I'd passed through. It wasn't clear, more like a shape outlined by the weak light, but it moved slow, deliberate, like it was waiting for me to turn around. I froze in place for a good 10 seconds, staring at the grainy footage. The figure leaned forward into the aisle as if studying the camera. Then, without warning, the feed glitched, jumping from static to a frozen frame. The timestamp froze too. 12:58 a.m. Every other monitor stayed normal, except that one. I remember tapping the screen like that would somehow fix it, but before I could decide whether to check again, the motion alert went off. A loud digital beep echoed from the console, and the same alert icon blinked over aisle 9 again and again. Mark came out from the stockroom after hearing the noise. I told him someone might still be in the store, and he laughed at first, until he saw the blinking monitor. We both stood there watching the frozen frame for what felt like a full minute. Then, as if the system had caught up, the image flickered back to life, showing the empty aisle. Every box, every shelf untouched. Mark muttered something about cheap wiring and told me to lock up early, but I wasn't ready to leave. I wanted to make sure that thing, whatever it was, wasn't still walking around in there. Mark headed to the front to shut off the lights while I did one last sweep. I rolled my cart past toys, clothes, cleaning supplies, all fine. But when I approached the electronics section again, the motion sensor above aisle 9 clicked on, and the lights there blinked to full brightness. I stood still, staring down the long stretch of shelves. The air felt heavier now, like the store itself was holding its breath. I took a few slow steps forward, the wheels of my cart squeaking against the floor, until I reached the middle of the aisle. That's when I noticed one of the display phones had been lifted off its stand. The cord hung loose, the plastic bracket swinging slightly side to side. I called out for Mark, but the lights overhead flickered at the exact moment I did. In that half-second of darkness, I saw movement at the far end. Something tall, pale, stepping just enough into view to make out the silhouette. I shouted again, louder this time, and the lights came back fully on. The aisle was empty. I backed away slowly, keeping my flashlight pointed ahead. The motion sensor behind me clicked off and the lights dimmed again, one by one, in a sequence like a wave pulling back into the ocean. By the time I reached the service counter, Mark was already turning the key in the front door. I told him what I'd seen, what I thought I'd seen, but he just shook his head, said I was overtired. We clocked out, and I lingered outside the glass entrance for a minute. From the parking lot, I could see the reflection of the camera lights blinking inside. Only one stayed steady, the red one above aisle 9. It was supposed to turn off automatically when the system went into night mode. That light just kept glowing. The next morning, I came back early, before my shift, and checked the footage again. Every recording from 12:45 to 1:05 was gone, corrupted, according to the system. But the strange part wasn't the missing video. It was the audio file attached to it. 30 minutes of silence, then a faint voice whispering my name. Not yelling, not calling, just whispering it over and over. The IT guy said the file must have glitched during compression. I quit a week later. But every year when Black Friday rolls around, I still hear that same hum in my head, like those lights are waiting for me to come back.